This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me. Beyond Donald Trump's adoption of a much more extreme agenda this time, perhaps the most significant difference between his first and second administrations has been the degree to which some of America's most elite institutions have decided to kiss the presidential ring. It's a trend that's been evident in many places, but perhaps no more so than in the halls of elite media, where even before the 2024 election, the billionaire owners of the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times prohibited their staffs from endorsing Trump's opponent, Kamala Harris. And since the election, places like CNN and elsewhere have bent over backwards to try to avoid offending the sensibilities of Trump and his supporters. The mainstream media's rightward turn under Trump, too, follows an earlier trend that is still ongoing, and that is the massive expansion of advocacy right wing media, including television channels like Newsmax and One American News, and YouTube podcast hosts like Joe Rogan and many others. There's a lot to discuss about all these developments, and so I wanted to bring in to talk about this with me Arthur MacMillan. He is a veteran political journalist who built the fact-checking unit of AFP, the Paris-based Wired news service, and he now currently writes newsletters at Axios. But for purposes of this discussion, we will be talking about a piece that he published over at the British Journalism Review that talks about media and the second Trump administration. I hope you'll enjoy. Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, religion, media, and society, and how they all intersect. And if you like what we're doing, I encourage you to subscribe to us on Patreon or YouTube or Substack. That's very helpful to stay in touch. And if you really like what we're doing, I would encourage you to be a paid subscriber. That is very helpful, and I could use your support for that. So thank you very much if you're able to do that. But we do have free subscriptions as well. So if you can't afford that, I understand. But I would still appreciate staying in touch anyway. All right. So with that little plug out of the way, let's get into the program. And joining me now is Arthur MacMillan. Hey, Arthur, welcome to Theory of Change.
Nice to be with you.
Yeah. So, all right. So you have an article that came out that I summarized in our introduction a bit. But so just to walk us through a bit more about your thesis within the article, and then we'll go from there.
Well, basically, since the victory of Donald Trump back in November, we've seen a fairly consistent pattern of a chill in media, where either news organizations via litigation or via perception do not wish to suffer any further than they already are at the hands of the new administration. We're obviously almost a year in now, and we've seen a succession of lawsuits. Oh, sorry, not even lawsuits. Lawsuits from the administration, but legal settlements from media organizations, including ABC, CBS. And the article was using the case study of Bari Weiss going to CBS as the head of news in a almost sweetheart deal involving David Ellison of Skydance, who has now bought CBS. And my point was to draw a parallel between something that happened in British politics in the 1980s when Rupert Murdoch used newspapers to exert political influence. And I think what we're seeing in the United States now at Skydance and CBS is a very particular example, is the power of tech via David Ellison and his father Larry to exert influence in the media, whether it's for commercial ends or for political ends.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is that David Ellison, for a long time, he had been a donor to the Democratic Party as well. So that to me does, raise the question of, well, what is it that he's trying to do here? Is it an ideological thing? Is it just purely about money? Or what was? Would he still support Bill Clinton if Bill Clinton was somehow transported back into politics? To me, or is it just that this guy actually wanted a more conservative party, a Democratic Party? I mean, but it's not just, it isn't just the Ellison family either that's really kind of trying to get in bed or pay off Donald Trump either, right?
Absolutely not. I mean, I can't look inside David Ellison's head, but I can look at his actions, and his actions imply a commercial imperative, which is to buy Paramount, the owner of CBS and a whole load of other franchises in media. And to do that, he's not really arguing day in, day out that he believes in conservative politics. What he is doing is taking measures that are currying favour with the present administration that is responsible for pushing through any such media sale via the FCC. So I don't think it's a change in politics. I think it's simply, he may have supported Democratic candidates in the past, but that's not at all unusual in this country. Donald Trump gave money, bizarrely, to Bill or Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's so long ago now, it almost seems almost pointless to mention, but in some ways it isn't. We've had Rupert Murdoch give money to Democratic candidates. He said very nasty things about Donald Trump, but Fox News, his most purposeful vehicle in terms of influence, apart from the odd little setback, such as calling Arizona for Joe Biden, Fox News has always been pretty supportive of Donald Trump, and possibly never more so than now. So all I think is happening is we're seeing an intensification where money, and in this case tech, is exerting itself through buying up businesses that once were dominant. But the media is in no way dominant now. CBS and Paramount is a big company, yes, but CBS News is a very small division within it. Regardless, Larry Ellison, I would imagine, and David Ellison see it as another lever which they can pull in order to exert some kind of commercial influence or reach to further their business interests.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it is interesting when you look at the way that the U.S. right and left, have an approach to media. I think that this second Trump administration really has kind of highlighted the difference. So, you mentioned Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch has been the owner of the New York Post for many decades now, and it's never been profitable at any point in time for him. And you note in your piece that there was a similar dynamic for many years with his Times of London as well, which was not profitable for most of its duration of his ownership until recently, when it threw up a paywall. But whereas on the U.S. left, and maybe, I don't know, you can discuss it in the UK context if you want, but on the U.S. left, there has been investment in media, but generally it is, ironically, much more profit driven. So whereas you had something like Air America or Current TV, or the recently divested MSNBC to MS Now, there is this complete lack of interest seemingly in having media outlets that might not be insanely profitable. which is odd considering that you hear people constantly say, "Oh, democracy is at risk. There's this terrible threat." But if we can't make money doing media, then oh well, let's get rid of it.
I think MSNBC is the best case in point there. You're absolutely right. It makes plenty of money. But I think on a fundamental level, it got a lot of stuff wrong in the last few years. I think as cable audiences across all political demographics, even in recent years, Fox News, it's not reaching the same number of people via domestic cable as it once did. That's a threat to the business model. However, it does reach key audiences, which drives advertising dollars. So there's still money to be made, like you say. But I hadn't even thought about it until you raised it when it comes to MSNBC and now changing to MS Now. That to me is a very direct business rebrand because the MSNBC franchise had become extremely damaged as a vehicle. Some people say it's all because Comcast, we want to spin off our cable assets from our television assets and everything else. Great, good for you. But in terms of the product and what I see, MSNBC to me had become also a very damaged franchise. And I think there's no better example of that than the host of Morning Joe and his partner, Mika Brzezinski, Joe Scarborough, I'm talking about, going down to Mar-a-Lago days after the election to basically kiss the ring of Donald Trump. Now, I watched Morning Joe for the entire, past administration and years before that, and to say that it was, how can I put it, a volte-face is not going far enough. It clearly was a capitulation and an effort to preserve business. And the program, as far as I'm concerned, lost all credibility through that. Maybe some of their viewers don't really care about the complete hypocrisy of such an act. But in terms of credibility, it speaks volumes for me. The lack of credibility. And I don't know what advertisers make of it, but that franchise to me, as an MSNBC program, was not going in the right direction when this political change happened. And a rebrand, I think, is what they wanted. So I think MSNBC, which no longer exists, really is a symptom of the media's lack of influence rather than any real influence.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what about the idea of, these, like Rupert Murdoch and his, and it isn't just him either, I should say, that, the Washington Times newspaper, for instance, was started in 1982 and at no point has been profitable. And there are, a host of other right-wing media enterprises that their owners, they run them either through donations from the public or from themselves. And whereas on the left, there seems to be more of a sense that, people will just figure it out, the truth. And we don't have to invest in telling them and reaching them and finding them and talking to them and listening to them, because they can figure it out. And I think that that's a very naive worldview for people who are allegedly sophisticated.
I think it's incredibly naive because most people now, and I don't really, in fact, let me reverse that. I wouldn't say most people. I would say a majority of people get their news from non-traditional means. And by that, I mean not a print newspaper and not a television screen. Radio still does surprisingly well. So I think that's a separate medium, which I haven't concentrated on. However, I have concentrated very heavily on traditional print media and television. In my past as a media correspondent, I dealt with all sorts of businesses in that ilk. And when it comes to non-profitable ventures, yes, here in Washington, D.C., for example, there's the Washington Times, there's the Washington Examiner. I can't really speak for their finances, but they are not regarded, and I'm sorry if this offends them, but they are not regarded as prime news sites. However, they are vehicles for news, commentary, at the behest of their editor-in-chief and whoever is that person's boss is. This is very traditional, and I don't think that has changed remarkably. What I would question is their power to exert influence any longer. Because as I've said, they are reaching fewer and fewer people, and through a polluted political narrative when it comes to media credibility, and there's only one expression that's defined the last 10 years, and it's fake news. Over time, that message really has struck home, and you only have to look at any Pew Research document or Reuters research document about trust in the media. Gallup, I refer to it in the article, gave out did their latest results very recently, and the bottom line is less than 1/3 of the audience has a high level of trust in traditional media. That's a pretty damning narrative, and so what I would say there is the desire to exert influence remains. The results far harder to measure than being called a media mogul or what have you. Because the industry itself has stratified to such a degree that news brands are not as recognizable any longer. And a lot of people have just moved on and gotten their news and opinion from different sources, whether it be Substack, whether it be podcasts such as yours, whether it be traditional media to a degree, whether it be NPR, whether it be the BBC, which continues to try and expand its footprint in the United States, and they've suffered a setback because of the fact that Donald Trump may soon be suing them. We will see continued change and upheaval in the business. And for sure, I think the MSNBC to MS Now change was a sign of a business trying to insulate itself from that upheaval. Because it's easier to talk about a new product than it is about one that has a bad reputation, or it's not really bad reputation, shall we say, has a bad relationship with the existing administration.
Yeah, well, and definitely Trump has been, very repetitive in saying his hatred for it, and his, associating that with its parent company, Comcast, NBC Universal. So yeah, no, I think that's right. And but one of the other things about the idea of bringing Bari Weiss into CBS News, which, on its face is completely farcical, because this is somebody who has no experience of any kind in television, and also no experience as a reporter, no experience, actually producing, actually producing content that matches the market that CBS seeks, which is a non-ideological, broad, mainstream audience. She has no experience at any of that. But that is something that's interesting. So you have somebody like Weiss, who is a conservative, although she denies that she is, although she gets all her money from conservatives, so one wonders. But nonetheless, she is somebody who is not a reactionary, like some of the more famous Donald Trump media people like Matt Walsh, or somebody like that, or she's not a religious zealot. She obviously, as somebody who is lesbian herself, is not anti-lesbian or gay, although seems to be very anti-trans. So this is somebody who is a conservative rather than a reactionary, and I don't know that there is even much of an audience for that perspective in the U.S., because the people who are voting for Republicans either don't really care or know anything about politics, or they tend to be people who are reactionary, and the people who want kind of this, more conservative, educated persona that Bari Weiss has. They don't seem to be very numerous, in my view. What do you think?
Well, the long and the short of it. So the short answer would be, do I think installing Bari Weiss will be a recipe for success for CBS? I would say it depends how you measure success. The long answer I'll go into now. Her appointment, I think, is fortuitous timing rather than any systemic planning. She launched a vehicle, the Free Press, which came out during a post-pandemic era, or the precise timing eludes me, but it certainly rose in the last few years, did generate a paying audience as well as a tenfold larger non-paying audience. But in the market that the media has become, it is undoubtedly a success. She has managed to sell it to the same aforementioned David Ellison for $150 million, which is a very significant sum. The move to CBS, we only really know the agreement that exists. In our heads, we do not know in any substantive way the agreement that exists between Bari Weiss and David Ellison on what she'll be doing at CBS. But she is not, as you've said, an overtly ideological figure, i.e. she's not going on X or somewhere else every day and putting the world to rights. However, she does have very strong positions on issues such as Israel, which is a topic that her boss and her boss's father have strong views on. They seem aligned there, as in very pro-Israel. And when I say pro-Israel, I don't mean that the person before was anti-Israel, but I'm merely trying to point out that ideological agreement seems to be a prerequisite at the moment to lead a media organization such as CBS under the Ellisons. In terms of your secondary point about whether there is an audience or whether it will work, let's take the will it work to begin with. In terms of increasing CBS's influence, I would say highly unlikely, because cable television remains the CBS business. They've had a few ventures in digital in the last few years, none of which have really resonated. In terms of the management of the organization, I mean, the perception in some fairly unsubstantiated reporting has been that she's going to change the culture of the newsroom, and she's going to change the identity or direction of the editorial leaning. I think that's highly unlikely, because again, CBS is not a small, nimble outfit like the Free Press, where she controls the hiring, other than key appointments. Those people are already there, and we're not talking a dozen, maybe 2 dozen people. and I'm sure the Free Press's headcount ended up being more than that. But when she started, it was her, and she picked who she wanted. And as someone who has worked at a level in the media, I can tell you that news organizations cannot be controlled to the master of puppets degree by one person. They just can't, because there are dozens, sometimes hundreds of stories produced a day, and the people who are there are the people who will produce them. And people can, like, the next day say, I hate that story, that shouldn't have been the way it was, but the story's already gone. You know, it's not going to be changed. So in terms of the editorial leaning, I think, yes, over time she may be able to change key areas, but in terms of the actual final product, I see very little changing. And I think if she comes in with the attitude that she can micromanage content, she will be sorely disappointed, because that is not how newsrooms operate. As someone who's been a news editor and has been a reporter for 20 years, I can tell you, you just cannot control a newsroom like that. It has a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and eventually you need to accept a lot of stuff, you know, otherwise nothing will ever leave the ship. And I haven't.
Well, you can't fire. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You can't fire everyone.
Exactly. You can't fire everyone, otherwise there'll be no product at all. And let's just say the head count is 5,000. I'm plucking that figure out of the air. She's not going to be able to hire and fire 5,000 people. She's probably not going to be able to hire and fire 500 people. Firing 50 people will take a long time. And I'm not sure how quickly the Ellisons will expect results, whatever results they're expecting. But one thing's for sure, she'll be accountable in many ways, and something that a lot of people have pointed attention to, Bari Weiss will be answerable directly to David Ellison, which is a change in culture, because she's the head of CBS News, and she will report directly to David Ellison at the company, and that didn't happen before. So that again is another change of the weather. You know, when the commercial masters can effectively control the editorial as well.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways, I think that this might represent what I see as kind of a longer term move of the U.S. press toward a more away from the more the 20th century mainstream media model toward a more advocacy oriented model, the way that it is outside of the U.S. And whereas for people who don't follow UK media and other countries, I mean, generally speaking, with some exceptions, they tend to be rather upfront about their alignments, political loyalties, and whatnot. And in some ways, that the fact that the U.S. has had a different model where the media outlets, the biggest ones, have tried to, at least according to them, not have a political alignment. It has had some positive and negative things, I would say. But I don't know. I mean, do you think that this is representing a turn to a partisan media, or what do you think?
I think you draw an interesting point when you talk about the traditional approach. It used to be, again, I don't wish to sound terrible, but the first time I came to Washington, D.C., 2011 to 2014, we didn't really have these discussions. We just didn't. Yes, people who read the Wall Street Journal would complain that the New York Times was overly liberal. And people who read the New York Times would complain that the Wall Street Journal is overly conservative. Those same people will probably still make the same points. What has not changed is that both of those news organizations run highly successful news and opinion products. They have done so because they have loyalty, they have quality, they may have opinions that plenty of people will disagree with, but that was once supposed to be a strength of a democracy. Now it's viewed as a weakness of character among key constituencies. Those organizations continue to do well. What I think has changed is that in the digitization of the news business, the vast majority of this country, which, believe it or not, does not read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times as their primary news source. They just don't. What used to be the primary news source was metropolitan newspapers. And as the print and cable local news models started to disintegrate, we had an environment where the orthodoxy was that these companies had to get louder and they had to get out on the internet and be more forceful in that direction. And that led to a traffic race where everyone is effectively competing for the same eyeballs. We've reached a point now where the trust in the media is so low and the economic model for those local industries of media is comparatively poor to what it once was, that there simply is not enough money to go around. And in the time that those models shifted from quality local content, whether that be beat reporting in courts, whether it be area reporting in large cities, metropolitan cities, that was sacrificed to protect the bottom line and to spend money on digital, chasing an audience. And that audience isn't there. And what has happened in the meantime is the editorial capability of such operations has dwindled, as has their effective revenue. So what I'm saying is that leads to a less informed population that is more susceptible to poor quality information. Bottom feeders is how it used to be termed in the news business, where if information is put in front of someone on their smartphone, it doesn't have to be true. They saw it, and it influences their views. And I honestly think that is where the change has occurred. The bottom line is people do not have quality information to base their decisions on. And because you have a president who constantly lambasts virtually all media as fake news, even reports that he doesn't like in media that he likes, he will say, that's fake news, that didn't happen. A lot of people still believe the president, and rightly or wrongly. They may be very poorly informed. However, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal remain two outlets that are doing a pretty good job of reporting the news, despite pressure to fall for the same trick of chasing everyone. They didn't. They put up their paywalls. They have subscribers, people who pay, and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, again, I didn't plan to bring that up, but it seems a logical conclusion. They serve their loyal audience, and anyone else they can reach is like a bonus. Whereas the enterprises I was talking about, they're just trying to reach anyone by any means possible. And being all things to all people just isn't possible 365 days of the year.
Yeah, or at least not at a massive scale the way that it once was. And I mean, but there, it is interesting though that we have seen this influx of tech money and social media money into traditional media spaces, because when you think about it, the traditional media actually was the original social media. Like classified ads in a lot of ways were the social media wall. Like that's what they were. And they were online dating. They were, your news feed, obviously, and then they were also your connection to your community, as you noted, in many places that that when local businesses needed to reach people, well, they advertised in the local newspaper or the local radio or the local TV. And um, since that localism and all of its ways got displaced by social media, it is interesting to see that the creator, coming for the monster coming for its creator, if you will. It seems like that in a lot of ways that's what's happening.
Yeah. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is going to be buying a newspaper anytime soon, but Jeff Bezos is the better example. He did. He bought the Washington Post, and again, his politics are not something he commentates on, but he was very popular under the past editor, executive editor of that newspaper, Marty Baron, who in his book Collision Power talks very forthrightly about the massive investment that Jeff Bezos made after 2012, expanding the newsroom, building bigger reporting divisions, and culminating in a very strong news team that reported very robustly on the first Trump administration. That was met by significant resistance from then President Donald Trump, whether it be threats to curtail Amazon's business enterprise, which I believe he did via a cloud contract that was no longer awarded to one of Amazon's divisions. We reached a point in the relationship where last year, obviously, Jeff Bezos decided that the business climate had changed, and he did not he stopped the endorsing of Kamala Harris as the presidential pick of the Washington opinion editorial team. That, I think, is a concrete measure of business sentiment, because Jeff Bezos no longer viewed the Washington Post as a primary business. It was very small. It only cost him $250 he paid back in 2011 or possibly early 2012. $250 million in today's AI and cloud and space race in which Jeff Bezos is invested in probably isn't a day's money.
You're talking about a company with $1 trillion market evaluations. This is a drop in the bucket for them.
So it's expendable. The point I'm making is it's expendable. It's not a primary thing for him anymore. He quite liked it at the time. It was a novelty back in the day. And plus he wasn't to begin with at least, because he bought it when Barack Obama was the president. He was not under the political caution any which way, shape or form. Jeff Bezos just decided he'd had enough. So tech has moved in there. In terms of the Ellisons, I think they're an intriguing example. We've talked about CBS. But I think another interesting example of tech changing its tune is Meta and Facebook. Because in 2016, Facebook got caught out very heavily by the Russian ads, which eventually obviously led to the Mueller report and all sorts of other political reports. Mark Zuckerberg going to Capitol Hill and apologizing, saying he'd made a mistake and all the rest of it. One of the corporate reactions at that time was to start a fact-checking program at Facebook and Meta, which worked for, and continues to work. It's still in operation, but I think we're all very familiar. At the start of this year, Mark Zuckerberg did a, I think, 4-minute video on Instagram where he declared, we're getting rid of fact checkers. And he said fact checkers damaged more trust than they built. Words to those effect. This is something from which I can speak very authoritatively because I managed that program in the United States for my then employer for 5 years. And I can tell you, as someone who worked and went to conferences with staff employees of Meta, they had nothing but praise for the fact-checking work that journalists did. And I think this was an example of where the whole reason Facebook started that program, it was not out of philanthropy. It was out of the fact that their credibility had been hurt, and they could not do the work of actual journalists in verifying information. No computer could do it at the time. And I say at the time because they've subsequently worked to make reporters' work scalable. But the bottom line was it required eyes, hands, and journalistic skills to debunk what has since become fake news. But again, Mark Zuckerberg realized that in the United States and in the political climate that we are in, it was not a good commercial move for him to continue to employ fact checkers in the United States because Donald Trump doesn't like them very much. And so he killed that program in the United States. So I think that's an example of where tech saw an advantage of using journalism to try and, shall we say, rebuild credibility in their platform. And when it became expedient to not do that, they changed their tune.
They did. Yeah, and that part is interesting, though. Yeah, the idea that fact checking is, controversial. I mean, that it is like that. That is patently absurd and, in a dangerous way. That fact checking might be controversial, and yet it is. I mean, and from my former standpoint as a Republican media activist, I was somebody who did attack fact checkers as liberally biased, and but it's but I do want to go back to that idea because the multiple organizations have tried to get right-leaning outlets to engage in fact-checking themselves, and they always have found a lot of difficulty getting them to participate. So it's like, well, you say these fact-checking is biased and liberal, but then you don't want to do it yourself. So what is it here? Like, you're going to say that you don't believe in facts? Is that what this is? And that was a tension that was kind of one of the things that led me out of the right, was that, I was somebody who was editing copy for a lot of different people, and I would make them check their facts and provide citations for their statements, and it made me very unpopular, I'll tell you. Because I wouldn't let them say things that they wanted to.
Yeah, well, we used to live in a time when reasonable people could disagree. That's increasingly uncommon now. And to give two examples, go back to the crowd at Donald Trump's inauguration in 2017. He got massively upset when the discussion about crowd size came up. Pictures, utterly authenticated, could show that the crowd was smaller than in a previous administration. There's no point going into details. Despite that, he continues to espouse the view that it was bigger than ever and whatever. But this is the failure to separate the hyperbole of Donald Trump from reality of photographic evidence. And there are people in our social media sphere who will simply say, oh, that photo's fake, that's not the real one, because they want to believe what they want to believe. And therefore, there was a time when, and it has infected newsrooms now. Forget the fact-checking element of it. In the piece I wrote in the British Journalism Review, I spoke to a CNN journalist. I spoke to several, actually, because I wanted to take a pulse of what the feeling was in the newsroom, given the thought that CNN, who Donald Trump regularly rails against, could be bought by Paramount, who have bought CBS News and installed Bari Weiss, who we have spoken about. And the reaction I got from a couple of people was, oh, I think I'm quite well placed if we get conservative owners. And I make the point that this is a psychological dismemberment. People are thinking about who owns them rather than the job they're doing, even if it's only 30% of their brain space going in that direction. It's like, oh, I'm not sure if I'll tackle that story. That might offend the new owners. And this is what I'm talking about. The moment the politics enters the newsroom in a overtly ideological way, you paralyze creativity and you paralyze independent journalism. And that's exactly what I think will be happening right now at CBS News. You could argue it's already happened. The most successful editor of 60 Minutes left because he no longer trusted the management, because the management were making decisions based on commercial grounds rather than allowing the editorial operation to investigate stories they found newsworthy. And the absolute critical point here is that in newsrooms now, people worry about their reporting much more than in any past decade that I have worked. Newsrooms used to be about finding things out. Now they're about not upsetting people. And that is a fundamental change, which I think is getting worse.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, so in terms of making things, I mean, is it possible to make things more resilient? I don't think it's certainly not possible to go back to the way things were. I mean, you mentioned in your BJR piece, you talk about the more halcyon days of CBS under people like Walter Cronkite or its president Richard Salant, who was a legendary figure within the organization. That now they've gone from somebody like him to Bari Weiss. Not a good trade-in, but but the old days are not going back. But I mean, what are some of your thoughts about the future on all this?
The future
can be fixed at all.
The future is small, and we're already seeing it. If we were to take some examples, I don't think everyone who publishes a Substack is going to be a successful news publisher. I think there's a massive difference between what, again, 15 years ago was called writing a blog and writing a Substack. Substack's a company that exists for profit, and I'm sure over time some people will succeed and others will fail. But going back to our original point about where the audience is and who they believe, I think, let's say the 2/3 of the audience that does not have a high degree of trust in the media, according to that Gallup poll, they do still wish to be informed. And whether that's through an influencer who does a news podcast every day, whether that's through a Substack that they follow and trust and pay for. We are going to see a lot more of that. The Free Press of Bari Weiss was a very early iteration of making that commercially profitable. I think we're going to see businesses, we're going to see some success stories in that era, and we're going to see many more failures. I think that's just the law of economics. I've written about it previously. Two people who are doing quite well in this realm right now are Lachlan Carmichael, who runs a very good media newsletter called Breaker, and Oliver Darcy, who writes slightly older, like it's just past 1 year now, but again, very commercially viable newsletter called Status. And what they are doing is covering stories that were just no longer being covered satisfactorily by traditional media. Oliver Darcy left CNN because he was starting to think, well, if such and such goes to buy CNN, I want to write about it. And he was starting to experience stories where it wasn't going to be easy for him to write. And he just took the view that it was no longer possible to be independent. And Lachlan runs a very similar enterprise. An example which is highly humorous but highly symbolic of this trend. Oliver Darcy was covered by the Wall Street Journal as the guy whose media newsletter has become a must-read. The Wall Street Journal is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch doesn't like Oliver Darcy, and he complained to the editor of the Wall Street Journal. And that story was not deplatformed. It stayed on the website, but it was shadowed. It was like knocked to the back of the queue on searchability and various other metrics, simply because Rupert Murdoch made a phone call. And I think that says it all. If someone has such a thin skin that they cannot be covered, then what hope for truth in the newsroom?
Yeah. Well, it illustrates the point of what Oliver is doing more than anything possible.
and while he will not have the same audience as he would have gotten at CNN, his audience is paying. And not only that, Oliver took first mover advantage and embraced it. And he got paying customers long before CNN did its now secondary efforts to build a subscription business.
Yeah.
And fair enough, maybe CNN will make a lot more revenue than Oliver because it's got a bigger audience over time. But Oliver Darcy decided to go out on his own because he thought he could do it better than CNN could do it. And I agree with him.
Yeah. Well, and in that sense, it is interesting that this subscriber-funded media, which is really what we're talking about here in the generic sense, that is a Back to the Future idea, because the original newspapers, when they were first made, they were all subscriber-funded. There was no such thing as advertising. Literally did not exist. And so you paid money to get your newspaper, and they sent it to you in the mail, and that was how it was. And although ironically, they had a subsidy, which is a lower postage rate from the postal services of various countries, and so in a lot of ways, this is kind of a Back to the Future moment, and so it's preserves independence in a lot more than the old enterprises did, because as these media conglomerates have just expanded and eaten up everything as much as possible, when you own so many properties, that it makes it so that you, as you noted about Murdoch, but certainly not just him, it makes it a lot harder for the people who work for you to be able to cover news that doesn't touch something that you have a direct involvement in.
I couldn't agree more, and that last point is absolutely critical. The newspaper model, as it then existed, became very successful because of advertising, not because of newspaper sales. In the UK, for example, a successful newspaper made twice as much money from advertising as it did from print sales. That was the model, 2 in 1. In tabloids, it was slightly higher. However, the audience was there and the advertisers were there. Where we're living now is in an audience where we don't know who we're reaching all the time, and advertisers can pay much, 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 much less, and they can insist on metrics that dictate the economies of the business. Whereas in the past, it was basically a newspaper who ran an organization that said, well, you should pay this much, because it was basically a conglomerate or a monopoly. Anyone who controlled, what was the old expression? Never argue with a man who has access to newsprint.
Buys ink by the barrel.
Yeah, buys ink by the barrel. That's it. Now, we have, and I can speak with authority on this, there are news organizations who are producing content and they don't know who it's reaching, but they hope it's reaching someone. And I think that's a fatally flawed model. But we still have that traditional newspaper, shall we say, scattergun approach. We'll fire the bullets and we'll see if they hit. Whereas a newsletter is more targeted. They know the subjects that people want to cover because there's a relationship. People find it easier to trust a small model because they can go straight to the author if they trust the author, whether it be Oliver Darcy or someone else. And traditional methods can then be used to verify information and produce a product that interested audience will pay for. And I think that's the difference between an Oliver Darcy and a metropolitan newspaper, because the metropolitan newspaper gave up on news gathering to preserve their bottom line and they lost their audience. And because the business has changed, they ain't getting those people back.
No.
That's really it. So that's where I see it going. Smaller, more nimble, more targeted, but critically more specialized. Because this is also where the metropolitan newspaper failed. They tried again to be all things to all people, and it's just not possible.
No.
With fewer and fewer staff. With fewer and fewer staff, I will add.
Yeah. I mean, what people wanted especially out of a local media outlet was remarkably different than what the owners of those outlets wanted to provide. I mean, that's really what it came down to, that, people were reading these Metro dailies, not so much for the opinion content or the school board coverage or things like that. They were in many ways there just to read the ads or the classifieds. I mean, I think back to the old days of newspapers. Like, I do know people that's what they did when they would pick up their alt weekly newspaper. They would go straight to the classified ads just for their amusement, or for their business purposes, that buying stuff or offering services, etc. So yeah. Anyway. Okay. So yeah. All right. Well, I saw your note there.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just pull your article back up here to make sure I talked about everything that was in my...
I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
Yeah. No, that's all right. Okay. Well, let's see here. I mean, I guess... So, okay. So we're coming up on the hour here. So, I mean, is there anything else that you want to add to that point, or do you? Well, actually, sorry. We'll just cut it to the end here. All right. So, well, this has been a great discussion, Arthur. So, for people who want to keep up with the things that you're doing, what are your recommendations for that?
Oh, in terms of like news or
social
like
media or your
yeah,
company's website, etc.
yeah. Just Google my name and you'll find me. That's all I would say. I don't really.
Okay.
I do very little social media these days for the reasons
Hmm.
I've really declared. Uh, I think social media is of limited benefit to a lot of people. I think it makes people feel angry, sad, misinformed, all sorts of things. I hate to sound a little bit despondent there, but that's my experience. And certainly as a newsman who spent 5 years looking at social media, I'm enjoying not looking at it on a daily basis at the moment. So I prefer to write myself and edit the work of people who I do believe in. So that's my journalism.
Okay, then. Well, so people can look you up and read your stories then if they are interested. All
Absolutely.
right.
And if anyone wants to ever reach out to me, they can do so. It's very simple. I've got an email address. It's arthurmacmillan@mac.com, and you can find me there.
Okay. All right. Well, sounds good. Thanks for joining me today.
Okay, thanks very much, Matthew.
All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate you joining us for the conversation. And you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show, where we have the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And my thanks to everybody who is a paid subscriber to the show. Thank you very much for your support. And if you can't afford to do a paid subscription, that's all right. We do have free subscriptions as well on both Patreon and Substack. Just go to patreon.com/discoverflux. And you can go to flux.community if you want to subscribe on Substack. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button so you can get it notified whenever there's a new episode. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.